Well, praise the Lord. I'm Pastor Inman, and you're listening to the Word of Deliverance. And I've got with me today Melanie and Michelle and Brother Mark. Great people of God, and it's so much of an honor to be amongst the people of God that love the Bible. And we said one of our programs, 2 Peter 3:12, uses a great verse after he talks about all the things in the last days and the false prophets and all the liars and people that's living in lust. He makes this great comment, Brother Mark, that you brought out of the day with the word hasting, looking and hasting until the coming of the Lord. Tell us what that means.
Hasting, if you look it up in the Greek, it means speeding to study.
Speeding to study until the coming of the Lord?
Until the coming of the Lord.
So that's what we do daily. Mm-hmm. And this is what our program is about. And I encourage everyone to learn to do that. I think you get more out of studying yourself than you do out of preaching. That's just my personal opinion. But I think a lot of people are preaching, going to church for preaching, and I believe that, supporting our preachers, because they feed the flock and people that don't know how to study. But I believe if you learn how to study with our Strong's Bible Concordance, is what we use, and a King James Bible, I believe you'll go a long ways, and I believe you'll learn some great things. Yep. Tell us, Melanie, what we're going to talk about today, because I believe today we're living in a time to where there's great problems upon the land, and I think it's coming real soon.
Yes, we're going to be talking about sexual sins and the judgment following, and we're going to be in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you know how you was mentioned over in 2 Peter 3:12 that talked about hasting to study speedily. And 2 Peter tells you about the importance of prophecy, because there's a lot of false prophets that are coming in the land and trying to steal away your study time and get you going back in the 1800s and following after these people, and they get out of our Bible. And when you get out of our Bible, you get out of truth. So today we want to talk to you about, again, those sexual sins and the judgment following according to our Holy Bible, the King James Version.
Well, you know what, Melanie, I really appreciate that, because the Bible, when you stay into the study and you scriptures every day and you study them, it kind of keeps us in line.
It does.
Because, you know, the human rational part of a human being and the mental part of a human being and those kind of things have a tendency to lead us out of the way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But when you stay into the scriptures and you stay into them on a daily basis, it does something like feed your soul, and it helps you.
Amen.
Now, the reason kind of what I thought this kind of program was kind of important, I'm glad you did this, is because of the fact that I had some people ask me, well, you just sound like that you're just against, I don't know what just about in this sex you mentioned in your programs. They was kind of nasty about that.
Yeah.
But the ideal is that I pointed this out in previous programs, that every time in the scriptures, when you go down through the scriptures and you point out sexual sins, you find out that judgment of God follows. Let me give you a little bit of an example. In 2 Peter, he goes on and says in verse 16, chapter 1, he makes this comment. Peter says, we've not followed cunningly devised fables. In other words, he's not talking about fairy tales, Hansel and Gretel, or, you know, the old bad wolf and, you know, grandma and all of this stuff. But he's actually talking about things that are very important. He says that they heard the excellent voice from heaven and all of this. Peter said, I was there and I saw it. He goes on to say in verse 20 that this Bible of ours, it's no prophecy is of any private interpretation. Means it wasn't for any little special group back in the days of Noah or something like that. But he goes on in chapter 4 and he tells them, listen to this, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and he's talking about before the flood. We don't have that book today, because that book of Enoch evidently was destroyed in 70 A.D. is what I figured out. That may not be right. But in 70 A.D., I figured it was destroyed when Titus took the temple. And they destroyed everything that was there. The things that were spared was hidden in the Qumran caves. But anyway, the whole ideal is, listen what he says. He took the angels in verse 4, reserved them unto darkness, and that was because of sexual sins. This is believed by most people that's where the giants came from. Now, he spared not the old world under Noah. That come in Genesis chapter 6. Romans chapter 1 tells us in verse 28 that it turned them over to reprobated mind. It says in Romans chapter 1, 14, 15, throughout the whole chapter, that these people love the creature more than the Creator. Men love men, and this is inordinate affections. In other words, their affections went beyond the laws of God, and they began to love things more than they love God. And women loved women. It goes on to say in verse 6 of 2 Peter chapter 2, that also that he turned the Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes and condemned them with the overthrowing of them. And it was a example unto those that after should live ungodly. It's examples to them. In other words, people have to take this as an example, because all of these times that we've seen down through the Scriptures that has had a sexual revolution, I believe it actually is something people should take heed to, because today you see the gay marriage issue, okay? Mm-hmm. You see it's demanded people in this country now to believe in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender stuff.
Yes.
They're demanding our children to take heed to it. And if people don't do it, they get an attitude and want to charge them with hate crimes and all of this stuff. When you see these things that are forced upon people, know the days are drawing nigh for the judgment of God. We relate that to the book of Revelations beginning to start. I don't need to use these things as strictly the only example. I could tell you there's many more things right now that's happening in the world that's showing you the judgment of God is upon us, and tells you how much America needs to have prayer meetings in the churches, prayer meetings at home. They need to be people humbling themselves, praying, fasting, and seeking God like never before, because the time has come upon us. Mm-hmm. Brother Mark, tell us, whichever one of you wants to tell us about the sins, let's say after the flood. Let's go on up to perhaps the golden calf.
Exodus 32.
Tell us about it.
Well, after they had got in covenant with God in Exodus 24, they said all the things that we would do, and they made a blood covenant with the Lord. Then in Exodus 32, they turned around and made a calf when Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days. And they played the harlot. They did orgies and danced and all these sexual sins, and while they were worshiping this calf.
Okay, here's what the people don't really know, is how many people died when they worshiped the calf. And what calf worship, you said there, you used the word orgies. It uses, if you go to Exodus 32, they were dancing. Mm-hmm. You know, if you go back to the Babylonian Talmud, search some of the old things, they were naked and having the orgies that they had back in Egypt.
Right.
These were sexual sins with a golden calf worship. Many people don't know what golden calves were when actually raised up 2 golden calves. Mm-hmm. And so they don't understand what this was. It is nothing but danger. How many people got killed there in Exodus 32?
Well, there was a total of 3,000 people that got killed with the sword. And then there was more people that died by the plague. It doesn't really say how many people died by the plague.
Well, I seen where they stayed, according to Deuteronomy, I think it was chapter 1, they stayed at Mount Sinai for a whole year. Mm-hmm. And God was really upset with them, and they drank the calf water, and a plague come from that too.
Right.
Some people see that as 2 different plagues. Mm-hmm. So the calf water are people that, they didn't want to come out and confess that they did it, and they really didn't confess of their sin. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of like judgment that comes when they ground up the calf and put it in the water and made them drink it.
Amen.
I won't spend any more time on this, but this is a great Bible study in itself. And there was probably as many as 1 million people died there.
Probably.
I mean, there could have been, definitely up in the numbers. Mm-hmm. Maybe 20, 30,000 more than the 3,000 that died that day. They don't, nobody know how many died there. But anyway, after this and that, what about, we mentioned Genesis chapter 6 already, so now we're in Exodus 32. What about if we go on up, Brother Mark? What happened to the people in Numbers under Balaam when they committed another sexual sin called fornication? Tell us what happened with that one.
I said, well, in Numbers 25, I'll use a New Testament verse. It says, 1 Corinthians 10:8, neither commit fornication as them committed and fell in one day 23,000. If you go look in Numbers 25 and verses 4 through 9, it tells you that they died with a plague. It was 24,000 of them. So the main issue here is, it's not we're picking on homosexuals. It's not we're picking on a group. The main issue is we're showing you what happened after all these gross sins was committed, how God's judgment fell on the people.
And it's all sexual sins that you find down through the years that has brung out the wrath of God.
Amen.
So I tell people today, with all of this stuff they're watching on YouTube, or not YouTube necessarily, I think television's the most damnable thing. You're demanded today to let your children watch Helen DeGeneres, Rosie O'Donnell, and there's so many other gay actors and stuff on television that there's no use mentioning them. I mean, that's all you kids get to watch now on television is things like that. There's nothing else to watch. Mm-hmm. If it ain't killing or raping or selling drugs or killing or getting high, it's something to do that destroys the God nature within the person. Mm-hmm. It's all a fight against Christians. Mm-hmm. Now, tell us what you would suggest here, Melanie.
What I would suggest about this sexual perverseness, I would suggest people stop, turn away, and repent. I believe that people need to seek the Lord and fast and pray. And, there's one more example that we can give you of sexual perverseness and how it brings on judgment. And it's in 1 Kings chapter 16 with Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians. And before that, she had caused the people to commit whoredoms and commit adulteries and stuff. And in 1 Kings 17 and chapter 18, they brought upon and ended the drought. So that was the 3.5 years of drought, famine.
Well, that's what the Bible said in James 5:17. Also in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus talks about the 42 months, the 3.5 years. People don't know too much in Christianity about the tribulation of the Old Testament, which was brought on by, according to what the Jews teach and the Babylonian Talmud, it was because of the sexual sins of Jezebel and Ahab and Israel involved in them.
Amen.
Now, the world is always in sin. We know that. But when God's people gets into sin, it brings a judgment.
It does.
God is sparing the world now because God's people is here, God's people is praying, and God's people is believing that they can win souls. Mm-hmm. But when God's people stop praying, they stop winning soul, the work of God is done here in this world.
Yep.
So the judgment is coming, and before the judgment, we have a guarantee that God has saved us, and He didn't leave us as Christians here to be hit with tribulation.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
I mean, to say that you're not going to make the rapture, that is so ludicrous, it's almost unbelievable.
Amen.
So we know that we've got a great time ahead of us as Christians that believe in the rapture.
Amen.
We know that it's going to happen before tribulation. Now, I believe that we're living in times right now that are so critical. I want to encourage those of you under the sound of our voice in the Dayton area, come and be with us at 518 Pleasant Valley. We've got a very special message, a series of messages I'm preaching every Sunday morning at 10:30 at 518 North Pleasant Valley. I believe you need to be here. Bring your children. I believe they'll enjoy themselves too. And if you want to come be with us Friday night, we've also got a series of messages we're preaching that brings your faith to a special level, which I believe is going to be needed to face the things that are ahead of Christians. I showed you today how judgment comes after sexual revolutions of God's people. And God's people has been turned over, and I believe it's a sad day. So we encourage you to come and be with us. Remember, Melanie, you've got a great Sunday school class every Sunday morning at 9:30, don't you?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
and I know it's great. Get so many comments about it. And you can also watch us on YouTube at, actually, Deeper Studies is one of our programs, and actually Word of Deliverance is the other one. You've been listening to Word of Deliverance today. My name is Brother Inman, and remember, get a prayer meeting. I believe you need some midnight prayers to get a miracle in your life. Tomorrow might be too late. Have a great day.